Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. My name is Felix Shipkevich. Today is October 11th, 2023. And thank you for joining us today for our workshop that will focus on the regulatory landscape of prepaid legal plans. We've covered the subject matter previously, partially in our webinars, particularly as it relates to the telemarketing sales rule. We will not be covering that part in today's webinar. Today is going to provide a high-level regulatory overview as it relates to different areas of law, different areas of compliance that this subject matter touches upon. We welcome you to look at our library that's available on our firm's website. We also welcome you to subscribe to our materials that are available on compliancejournal.com. If you subscribe, we'll provide you with free access, and you'll have a pretty substantial database of documents and information that could be valuable to you and your company. For those of you who are returning viewer of our webinars and educational materials, we thank you for returning. And for those of you who are new, we hope you enjoy this. We previously circulated save the date for our upcoming in-person annual workshop. This will be our fourth annual workshop that will be held in Orange County, California. The date was January 25th, 2024. So save the date is January 25th, 2024. More information to follow in coming weeks. We have an exciting agenda, and we hope to see you in person. So let's begin. I am joined today with my colleague, Yvonne Bowser-Caballero. Yvonne, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here hosting this webinar with Felix. My name is Yvonne Bowser-Caballero, and I have been counsel with Shipkevich PLLC since 2021. I mainly focus on transactional services in the financial services, debt relief, and non-bank lending spaces, primarily focusing on licensing and regulatory work in those fields. I frequently speak with state regulators and work with them on licensing and regulatory matters, and I am excited to be presenting this material with Felix today.
Thanks, Yvonne. Yvonne is really my go-to person on licensing work. She is now working on with state regulators on the prepaid legal work, which has been growing tremendously in the past, I would say, 1 to 2 years. And she's actually rounding out 3 years with our firm, which is exciting. She joined, I believe, in February 2021, if I'm not mistaken. A little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know, I'm a regulatory attorney. I work on the federal and state level with regulators, on the federal level in the fintech space with the SEC, the CFTC, the CFPB, the Federal Trade Commission. And unfortunately, from time to time, I do work with DOJ on certain investigations. On the state level, my firm works with state attorney general's offices, with state regulators involving enforcement proceedings. We work with the New York State Division of Financial Services, California DFPI as examples. And our firm is a full-service law firm that provides financial services companies in a variety of areas, assistance in navigating complex regulatory matters, both as licensing and enforcement defense. And we appreciate you joining us. Oh, and for those of you who, outside of legal expense plans or prepaid legal, I teach at Hofstra Law School. I'm very proud of it. This is going to be my 7th year. I have a textbook coming out in a couple of weeks. If you ever would like to be bored and fall asleep reading a law textbook, you could find it on Amazon. It's not yet available, but you could find it if you put my last name into Amazon. It's called Digital Coins and Cryptocurrencies, Law and Regulation. So if you ever have insomnia and want to fall asleep reading a 700+ law textbook that my students will be reading starting this spring, and hopefully students of other law schools, I encourage you to buy it. It's going to be a great material for your future insomnia resolution problems. A little humor to this webinar. All right, well, going back to the prepaid legal discussion. So here's what we're going to try to cover today, and we're going to try to be quite conservative what we will try to cover. The subject matter itself is complex. Do not underestimate the complexity of subject matter of understanding prepaid legal plans. And I welcome you to email me directly to see if you'd like us to continue providing more educational information on this subject matter in future webinars. And let me explain to you why. The subject matter of prepaid legal plans is almost like saying, regulatory overview of an insurance law or insurance industry. Well, where do you begin? So what my goal today with Yvonne is to provide you with a high-level overview of some of the legal and regulatory issues, and to have some more than basic, more kind of mid-level understanding of what exactly and how are prepaid legal plans regulated. What exactly are prepaid legal plans, right? How are prepaid legal plans relevant today? Particularly, how are they relevant today for consumers, right? Particularly, what is the need for consumers? How do they benefit the consumer market, right? How do you distinguish prepaid legal plans from legal membership plans, right? It's important to distinguish the two, and we will distinguish those two. And then finally, at the very end of this presentation, Yvonne and I will discuss the regulation of prepaid legal plans and will provide you with a few different state-by-state examples of how they're regulated. So let's move forward. So what are prepaid legal plans, right? So let's start with a very general overview. And by the way, the format of this webinar is that Yvonne and I will have a dialogue, right? So we'll go slide by slide, and I will provide my commentary, and then Yvonne will jump in. So I want you to understand, and you understand. So here we have what exactly are prepaid legal plans. Well, the basic, simple layman's definitions are: prepaid legal plan offers coverage that grants individual and families access to a network of qualified attorneys in exchange for predetermined monthly or annual fee, right? With legal expense plans, participants can receive advice, have legal documents drafted and reviewed, and receive consultation or representation in court for a fraction of the cost associated with hiring a lawyer. So why don't we stop right there? What I did was I bolded and italicized a couple of keywords here, which are going to be quite relevant for our webinar today. First of all, it's a plan, right? It's a plan, right? What is a prepaid legal plan? It's a plan, right, that has some type of coverage, right? And that's why you see the bolded word coverage. And in order to have that plan and coverage, you have to have a network of qualified attorneys. I should have bolded the word qualified attorneys because, well, they could, if you don't have qualified attorneys, it's not a network, but you have to have a plan, a coverage, and then you have a network, right, for a fee, right? And that fee could be a monthly or an annual fee, right? And in return for paying that fee, a consumer receives an advice to prepare documents or prepare documents, or receive a consultation, right? Or receive some kind of a presentation in court. But it says here for a fraction of the cost, right? It doesn't say entirely to cover the entire fee of the cost, for a fraction of the cost. We'll explain to you why a little bit later. Let me go to the second bullet point. These plans leverage a network of attorneys, right? Because the objective for a consumer is to leverage the network, right? The objective is not to say, hey, here's a network and go nuts with it, right? You need to have qualified attorneys be part of that network, right? So you need to leverage the attorneys in the network who have agreed to provide services as part of their contract with the legal expense plan organization. There are typically no bills, deductibles, or claims forms to fill out, provided you use an attorney within the plan's network, right? This is pretty self-explanatory. Now, Yvonne, anything else you want to add to this particular slide?
Nope, I think we pretty much covered just the general overview of what a prepaid legal plan is.
Okay. So I know probably some of you have questions, but why did you have in the first bullet point for a fraction of the cost? And we could talk about it. It doesn't necessarily have to be fraction of the cost, because if it is an insurance policy in the states where it's regulated like an insurance, you don't have to be a fraction of the cost, because a fraction of the cost could also be read if you're paying a premium towards a policy. But generally, don't overthink it. It's simple. You pay a fee, you get access to a network, and you can benefit from network. A very good example that for those of you who are firm's clients listening to this, I know that there are a number of you who are firm's clients, is I provide an example. It's like the AAA, right? You get access to a network of, if you get stuck, right, in the middle of nowhere, you get access to a network of all these tow trucks, right? They could pick you up and they could drive you the first 3 miles, and afterwards you pay a fee, right? Or if you have Geico or Allstate and you get into a car accident, you get access to a network of attorneys who represent you. Just think of a network, right? Except for here, you have a network of attorneys who will provide you with some type of qualified advice. And then the question is going to be whether it's transactional advice or it's litigation-driven advice. And we can discuss that a little bit later, okay? All right. Now, what I want to do now is I want to bifurcate the discussion, right? And the rest of the presentation is going to talk about prepaid legal plans, but there's a thing that's called there's legal membership plans, right? And that's why we're going to bifurcate this. And we're not going to talk about legal membership plans in this discussion. That is a different subject matter of itself, right? And that's why I have it here early in the presentation. So prepaid legal plans, members pay a periodic fee for access to certain legal services like document review, drafting, consultations provided by attorneys within the plan's network. Again, prepaid legal plans have plan provider pays its member attorneys directly, right? So the plan provider pays member attorneys directly for the services provided to its subscribers, right? Again, this is very important. The plan provider pays its member attorneys directly. Then you have prepaid legal plan providers may also provide access to other legal services provided by their member attorneys outside the scope of the provided legal services at a reduced cost, right? So you potentially have additional services at a reduced cost. And then many states regulate this as an insurance or under a separate heading of the heading on the statutory level. And Yvonne will discuss that later, right? So in a nutshell, prepaid legal plans generally, not always, I want to be very careful saying here, but generally may act as an insurance product, right? Particularly if you have, as the second bullet point says, the plan provider pays its member attorneys directly, right? If you have the plan paying the attorney directly for the services. And again, it's not a catch-all. It doesn't mean it's a blanket. It depends on the state statute. It depends, you have to look at state by state, but that's a general concept, right? That's sort of like the starting point. You have to distinguish it. And it's a very big distinction from a legal membership plan, right? Where members pay a periodic fee for access to a network of attorneys to provide their services at a reduced cost, right? So you get access to an attorneys, right? You pay, hey, you pay us $10 a month, and in return for $10 a month, you get access to our network of attorneys, and here's an a la carte list of the fees they charge at a reduced rate. So as an example, right, you get access to wills drafting. Their attorneys regularly will charge you $1,000 to draft a will. If you pay $10 a month, you could, our attorneys will draft a will for $200. Again, this is just merely an example. Or if you have a landlord-tenant dispute, you could get access to our attorney at, I don't know, $25 an hour, right? Versus a regular fee of $250 an hour. Again, just as an example. Very common membership plans now exist in the healthcare field. Very, very big, extremely big in the dental field, in the healthcare field, where for right now, dermatologists and dentists offer these plans where you pay directly to a dental group or a dermatology group, and in return you get discounted costs directly from that group, right? And that's what it is. It's a plan, right? So plan providers, they don't play their member attorneys on behalf of subscribers. They don't. What they do is they give business to their attorneys. They say, hey, attorney, do you want to participate in our plan? You'll have to provide a fee in accordance with the plan. You can't charge a high fee for our members, right? You'll have to provide a discounted rate, but you if you're part of our network, you hopefully will get business. So it's kind of a trade-off for the attorney, right? Because the attorney can, on one hand, the attorney can, get more business, but very likely would have to charge lower cost, right? So, so that's sort of the trade-off. So that's a big difference between, membership plans and prepaid legal plans. Yvonne, anything that I missed? Anything that you want to add?
Yes, and just to further distinguish the legal membership plan from the prepaid legal plan, the plan providers do not provide access to any sort of specific legal service. This is, as Felix mentioned, only access to attorneys at a reduced cost. The members themselves would be paying the attorneys for whatever services that they would be engaging with the attorney. They would not be, this membership wouldn't be paying anything for them on their behalf. And that's a big distinction, is that, the plan provider is not paying anything on behalf of the member. The member is simply paying for access to a network of attorneys who provide services at a cost that may be less than what, attorneys in the area normally would charge for services.
Yeah. And another point that is important, which is the last bullet point on the right-hand column, the legal membership plans, is generally, again, this is not legal advice, but generally states do not regulate legal membership plans. When I say generally, there are a few states where bar association, well, I shouldn't say bars, the bars will require to get like local registrations if you offer a membership plan, and it's a simple registration. I've seen it with just a handful of states. I don't want to tell you what they are, but generally there's no such thing that you would have to go become licensed to offer a discounted plan, because you're really not offering a regulated product, right? You're offering basically just generally just saying, look, I'm giving access to a network of attorneys. You pay them directly. You're just paying me kind of a monthly fee. And again, this is not to be construed as legal advice. You should certainly take a look at the local ethics rules, but it's not something that the states themselves would generally regulate, unlike the prepaid legal plans. Okay. So this is a very, very big distinction. And I can't tell you how often I hear people mixing the two, and how they are sometimes just kind of putting them in what I like to use as a big bowl of spaghetti. And this is the first fork in the road, right? Are you offering a legal membership plan, or are you offering a prepaid legal plan? All right. Now, what I have for you here with Yvonne is what we wrote down is as many different variation of what prepaid legal plans could be called, right? Because, when we're looking to title this presentation, we were just, both Yvonne and I were struggling. Like, what do we call it? You could call it legal insurance, but it's not insurance in every state. Legal expense plan. Well, it's only a handful of states that call it legal expense plan. Legal expense organization. Only a few states call it legal expense organization, right? Legal expense insurance, legal services insurance, legal service plan, legal services contract, prepaid legal services plan. I mean, you see how many different variation of this product. So for the purposes of this presentation, and to make it very simple, we're calling it prepaid legal plans. But you do see the different variations that it could be called. what we also did is we provided you with a couple of examples, right? Again, this is for informational purposes only, and the 5 examples below are none of our firm's clients. We do not represent these clients. We do not have any stake in these clients. We have not asked to present these clients. In fact, they specifically wanted to be neutral in selecting. You have different types of companies that do this more or less on the national level, but they all have very different models, right? They all have very different models. But for those of you who are looking to, get into this space, these, 5 companies provide you a little bit of a roadmap of the different types of options that are available. As an example, MetLife Hyatt Legal Plans. Well, MetLife is an insurance company, so just merely Googling MetLife Prepaid Legal, you'll get to their website. And I don't represent MetLife Prepaid Legal, but it's an insurance product. Then you have Legal Shield. Legal Shield's been around for decades. I mean, this product has been around for such a long time. And, I don't represent Legal Shield, but it's a reputable company. It's been around, I believe, since 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. It was at some point a publicly traded company, and a private equity company took it private, I believe, in the past decade. Forgive me if I'm I think in the past decade. But they do offer, I believe, both depending on the state. Some of them could be more like membership plans, some like prepaid legal plans. Well, LegalZoom is not an insurance company. LegalZoom is it's a legal tech company, but they do offer for businesses an opportunity to purchase a plan for consultation, right? They do offer, for transactional work. Last time I checked, an ability to call in and buy a certain number of, I guess you could call credits. And then Nationwide Legal Guard, that's an insurance company, and ARAG, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct, legal insurance. I mean, that's obviously an insurance company. Yvonne, anything else I missed here or you'd like to add?
Yeah, and just to further on the different variations of prepaid legal plans, this is why this is such a complex material, because you have all 50 states labeling, what we deemed as prepaid legal plan, just for simplicity's sake, as all of these different, names and titles, which is why it can be extremely confusing when you're entering into what you think is a prepaid legal plan, and you don't realize that in that state, that actually means it's legal insurance or legal expense insurance or a legal service contract. So just kind of focusing on you see the sheer number of these different variations and just how that shows the complexity of this material.
All right. So for those of you who know me and who've attended our firm's in-person workshops, know that I cannot discuss a subject matter without providing a little bit of history behind it. I just don't think it's fair. So forgive me if it's going to be boring. I hope it be actually interesting. The history of prepaid legal plan is actually rooted, it goes back to 100+ years. It goes back to Europe. And actually, when Yvonne and I were looking into, what's the history of prepaid legal, right? It's kind of interesting. How did we get here? And why all of a sudden, is this an interesting subject matter? Is, in Europe, going back to, I believe, the early part of 20th century, legal plans were offered in Europe, going back to predating World War I. Well, let's fast forward to this side of the pond and the second half of the 20th century. Legal plans have, gotten their birth in the US primarily after labor unions lobbied post-Taft-Hartley law to allow their union members get access to their union attorneys. and be able to consult with the union attorneys on labor and employment law issues. And that was one of the benefits that was originally provided to union employees. And that was sort of the birth of the legal plans, right? I mean, it just didn't come out as like consumers are buying legal plans, right? It came out initially as sort of a fringe benefit to union employees under various collective bargaining agreements. And, they're offered to teachers and dock workers and police union members and the like. So eventually, right, 1980s, 1990s, and I think this is, again, I forgive me if anybody's listening from Legal Shield, if I've mistaken the history of Legal Shield. I actually would love to, because arguably that's one of the oldest prepaid legal plans or legal membership companies that I've come across. The consumer market, the rise of the credit card debt, particularly late 70s, early 80s, the wider use by consumers of credit card, the rise of medical debt has given rise to debt reduction services, right? To credit counsel, not-for-profits, credit counseling, to, debt settlement industry and the like. And therefore, also gave rise to the creditors pursuing litigation against consumers, which has risen and continues to rise. And obviously it fluctuates depending on where we are in terms of our economy. I think it's back on the rise, but in 1980s, 1990s, prepaid legal plans began to evolve and offer other services, including, wills and trusts, and begin to offer, primarily transactional type of services. Yvonne, anything else you want to add here?
Sorry, my mute was on. Nope, nothing else that I really want to add here. But yes, and just kind of to, it was really just starting with unions, and then and really even today, for the most part, where we see most prepaid legal plans is employers offering these plans, similar to how unions would offer it to their union members, employers offering these plans to their employees.
Yep. Okay. So how are they relevant today? Well, again, moving away from a brief history, we meaning we living in the US, we are a very litigious country. That's not a surprise. I'm sure that some of you are probably chuckling as I'm saying this, because our firm represents U.S. Defense Counsel in various litigations. But we obviously have a lot of litigation on our hands, and litigation is expensive. But the cost of legal services is only rising. And of course, I could hear some of you chuckling. Felix's invoices. I'm kidding. Listen, I always like to bring a little humor. Look, the cost of litigation is always expensive. The cost of legal services continues to rise, just like the cost of healthcare, right? And so the question is, is potentially, is there a solution, right? Can legal expense plans be potentially the solutions, particularly for debt-distressed consumers who may not be able to afford the services, who may not be able to afford to, have the necessary time or expertise to appear in courts, with very aggressive litigants, lawyers representing creditors. I could tell you, I mean, I've been an attorney now. I'm now entering my third decade, and I have litigation experience under my belt. I could tell you that, not many courts are very friendly for pro se litigants, and they could get very complex when it comes to understanding the procedure. And I tell you that the U.S. courts and the clerks and the judges bend over backwards for pro se litigants. They really do, but it's an overwhelming process. And so, unfortunately, for those who do want to hire a lawyer to represent them in any type of a creditor lawsuit or landlord-tenant lawsuit, or who just basically want to have access to a lawyer, they get just primarily priced out. And that's exactly what you see, right? And you see this directly from a report. This was an article from Washington Post, but according to the US Bureau of Statistics, hourly rates for legal services have grown over time. The majority of middle income consumers being priced out of the market for basic legal services, partly because they do not qualify for free legal aid, right? They just get priced out. Studies have shown that 60% of middle class legal needs are unable to be met by existing legal service. 60% of middle class. I mean, that's a staggering income. That's middle class, right? That's not lower class. So that's a big problem. So if 60% of middle class can't afford, what are we talking about? The lower middle class. That's a big problem, right? So while there are many plans that are widely available in the areas of health, automobile accident, and fire insurance, there are a few such systems designed to insure against cost of legal services, right? So again, this is actually even more interesting. So there's some statistics that we found for this webinar, which I hope some of you will actually find interesting, because I know that you're probably looking forward to hearing a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, and I apologize if you didn't. But in 2020, Stanford Law School published a report. I'm happy to email it to you. It's actually out here in the presentation, but I could forward it to you if you'd like. They published the following report. The U.S. ranks number 115 out of 140 countries in access to justice and affordability of civil legal services. We're below Tanzania, Honduras, and Mongolia. You know all those people that crossing our borders from Honduras? So according to Stanford Law School, people in Honduras have better access to legal services than we do, than an average American. That's pretty amazing. 2/3 of American adults reported having a civil legal problem in the past year. 2/3 of American adults. Think about this, right? But only 1/3 of those received any help. And in 2020, obviously, because this, nearly 80% of civil cases involve at least one party without an attorney, right? 80% of civil cases. That's double the percentage of litigants in 1980. So what does that mean? That means that there's a significant, market, right, for prepaid legal expense plans. There's a demand for it, right? There's sort of this, again, I'm looking at it from a purely academic and the legal perspective, but it seems to me there are many consumers who are not getting access to legal help. And so is there a way to solve the problem with these statistics? And that's why and how we're going to turn to the regulation. And I'm going to turn this over to Yvonne, and the information she's going to provide as an example here in this subject matter is not intended, obviously, to constitute legal advice. It's for educational purpose. So Yvonne, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Felix. So we're going to do a brief, just very high level overview of state regulation of prepaid legal plans. So depending on the state, prepaid legal plans can fall into 3 separate buckets. 1 is the category of insurance, 2 is within its own category, and 3 is non-regulation by the state, at least on the statutory level. And please remember that this is a complex matter, and this analysis is based solely on regulation at the statutory level, and doesn't include a survey on state bar, ethic rules, or advisory opinions. So just please keep that in mind when we're talking about these 3 buckets of states and regulation at that state statutory level. So a large number of states have promulgated statutes that incorporate prepaid legal plans into their state legal insurance code. And they've granted insurance commissioners the power to alter and draft regulations as they see fit for prepaid legal plans. And in these states, providers must meet minimum capital requirements, maintain unearned premium reserves, establish bonds or security deposits, authorize background checks. They may be required to be organized as an incorporation, among various other requirements. So these are the same requirements that you're seeing for insurance companies generally. And that is the first bucket of states. There is the second bucket of states where they acknowledge the existence of prepaid legal plans, but require registration or licensing separate from insurance. With these plans, usually a copy of your plan contract is submitted to a state commissioner for review, or in some cases to that state's bar for review, which will then review and approve the application and forms and contracts and provisions located within those individual plans. For the assurance of consumers, some states may even require these plans that are not regulated as insurance to have initial capital in the form of money or bonds. And Felix, is there anything?
Let me add. So again, so what we have here is we have one bucket, which is an insurance product. Mm-hmm. Let me distinguish this type of insurance product from what you imagine is a licensing for your traditional insurance product. It's not. It's not. And that's one of the biggest myths and misconception. I recently had lunch with somebody who does a lot of work in the insurance space, and when our firm doesn't, we may have done insurance related licensing, in other areas here and there, but this is not what we do. But you're not getting licensed as, an errors and omissions and a D&O provider or an underwriter. This is not that type of insurance. I want to be very clear. This is legal insurance. Legal insurance, right, is while it may fall in some state in the definition of insurance, it has its own bucket, right? It has its own statutory provision. The registration for that type of insurance is very different than what you imagine for like life insurance or for D&O insurance and E&O insurance. It's not, right? And I want to be able to distinguish it, because a lot of people say, oh, I got to go to one of those insurance lawyers to get registered. No, you don't, necessarily. You could if you want to, it's up to you. But those lawyers, I could tell you, I actually had a few conversations recently with some of these lawyers. They had absolutely no idea that legal insurance even exists. All right. And so that's the distinction. The legal insurance is kind of its own separate category. And it's more synonymous with your type of licensing that exists in your fintech space, if I could sort of give you a little bit of a comparison, more so than your traditional insurance products, right? I want to be able to distinguish that. The second bucket that Yvonne discussed, that's your bar. So, bar associations of bars, you have to like go to the local state bar. That's a little bit different, right? It's not an insurance product, but you still have to get bar approval. And, that by itself may not be that simple, to be honest with you. You need to make sure that you're using the proper channels and you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's, because if you're not filling out their application correctly and you're not, and you're not reading the statutory requirements correctly, that application is going to get denied really quickly. Because as we all know, right, bars are typically very protective over their own, attorneys, right? And so when, if you are creating a network of attorneys within the state and you are looking to come in and say, look, we're looking to give business to attorneys in your state, right? Here's 10, 20, 30 attorneys that we're looking to bring in. There has to be a way that you're bringing forth this information. You can't just be coming in and filling out an application and you have like one attorney or two attorneys in that state. That's just not going to look really good. And I could tell you that you want to be very careful. So that kind of like my commentary on this. Okay, go ahead, Yvonne.
And just one more thing to add to that, this overview doesn't also include any requirements on the part of member attorneys. In many state bars, member attorneys are required to ask for permission to be participating in these prepaid legal plans. So that's also something to keep in mind. And now moving back to the first bucket, prepaid legal plans regulated as insurance products. We wanted to give you a few examples of states where prepaid legal plans have been deemed as legal insurance, requiring prepaid legal plans to be licensed as an insurance product. So, for example, in Arizona, a prepaid legal insurance contract means a contractual obligation to pay or reimburse for specific legal services rendered in the normal and ordinary course of business by an active member of the State Bar of Arizona. So this is a very generalized definition that would include, most prepaid legal plans, if not all prepaid legal plans. And here we see this as an insurance contract in Arizona, which requires prepaid legal plans to go through licensing with the insurance commissioner in Arizona and be licensed as an insurance product. Again, in Florida, we see legal expense insurance means a contractual obligation to provide specific legal services or to reimburse for specific legal expenses in consideration of a specified payment for an interval of time, regardless of whether the payment is made by the beneficiaries individually or by a third person for them, but does not include the provision of or reimbursement for legal services incident to other insurance coverages, meaning, legal services incident to a car accident, for example. Then your car insurance, your automobile insurance will cover that. That's separate. So here again, this is a pretty broad definition. So it doesn't matter if you're reimbursing or if you're paying, member attorneys on your beneficiary's behalf. These will fall under the umbrella of legal expense insurance in Florida and require you to be licensed as an insurance product. Now we'll move on to the second bucket of, regulation for prepaid legal plans, which are prepaid legal plans that are regulated, but not as an insurance product. So several states have defined prepaid legal plans distinct from insurance and have created a separate regulatory process for these plans. For example, in Virginia, a legal services plan means a contractual obligation or an arrangement whereby legal services are provided in consideration of a specified payment consisting in whole or in part of prepaid or periodic charges, regardless of whether the payment is made by the subscribers individually or by a third person for them. So again, you have that same language about, either whether you're paying on behalf of the subscriber or if the subscriber is paying the attorney individually. But here, Virginia has made a distinction and separated legal services plan outside of their insurance code and created their own licensing process for both sellers of legal services plan and organizations that offer legal services plans. Similarly, in South Carolina, prepaid legal services mean legal services or reimbursement for legal services provided by an individual licensed or admitted to practice law in the jurisdiction in which the services are to be rendered and which are provided in return for a predetermined specified periodic fee. So again, you see the same language, providing legal services in return for a periodic fee. And here, there is no distinction about, who is paying on their behalf, but it's a pretty broad definition of a prepaid legal services plan, which would include every prepaid legal service plan for the most part. And South Carolina has, again, distinguished it from insurance and created a separate process for registration and licensing that is not as, requirement heavy as maybe being regulated as an insurance product, but still requires you to be licensed or registered.
And so these are very good examples. You see how Virginia and South Carolina do not regulate it as an insurance product. However, However, they do have just a separate registration category for these products. So it is regulated, right? And so you need to be mindful that if you are offering or planning to offer these services, the very first thing that you should do is always look at the definition of legal services plan, or prepaid legal services. And you see, this is exactly what I was saying earlier in the presentation. You don't have consistent definition. I always joke around, when when we do our annual event, that in the debt settlement industry, you have debt pooling, debt settlement, debt reduction, debt consolidation, right? Like 4, maybe 5 definition. You have about, I mean, at least a dozen, maybe more different type of variation of prepaid legal plan, and you have to literally dissect each state by state definition. And on top of a definition, and again, I'm only using debt reduction, debt settlement industry as an example, just because I know that this is obviously, this is becoming a very interesting subject matter for those type of for the industry. But you have to then go in to see whether or not you're indemnifying the subscribers, who's paying the subscribers. You have to literally go state by state statutes, and it's very detailed, and it's very time consuming, and it gets complicated. It's a very complex subject matter. So go ahead, Yvonne. Yvonne?
Sorry, I apologize. I forgot to unmute myself. And going back to the previous slide, there are also states that perhaps don't require registration or licensing, but do have statutory requirements that these prepaid legal plans must adhere to. So that's another thing to watch out for, is that even if you don't necessarily need to be registered in states that don't regulate these as an insurance product, there may be separate statutory requirements that you still have to adhere to. And then moving on to the third bucket is states.
No, that was the third bucket, the states that don't regulate. Yeah.
Yes, states that do not regulate prepaid legal plans. So a number of states have excluded prepaid legal plans from their insurance regulations, or have decided not to regulate the product at all. One of the main reasons for this is that they wish to encourage the availability of the product within their state, or due to the minimal coverage aspect of the plan, these states find that plans do not require regulation at the level of insurance. For example, in Arkansas, the General Assembly passed legislation just this year that repealed the Arkansas Legal Insurance Act and determined that the Arkansas Insurance Department should no longer regulate the business of prepaid legal insurance. So we are seeing this in a few states where they have expressly decided to no longer regulate these, or eliminate that ambiguity between prepaid legal plans and insurance, in order to encourage companies to offer these sorts of plans. Because like we discussed, there is a major need, especially in the middle income bracket, for access to legal services. So many states, to encourage this, have eliminated any sort of regulation requirements.
Yep. Thanks, Yvonne. On the final note, we're at the end of our presentation. I want to tell you something that I did not include in this presentation. This is obviously our contact information. There's a significant interest in this subject matter with the rise of certain states providing for alternative business structure, ABS, which is Arizona and Utah, and California is also considering it. We foresee that there may be also a significant increase in prepaid legal plans and legal membership plans rise in the US. These are quite popular in Europe. They're offered by major supermarkets. I always joke around, if Amazon wanted to offer a prepaid legal plan, it would essentially be arguably a quasi biggest law firm in the world or the US. So it is an interesting subject matter to follow. It's an interesting development, and I urge you to send me questions and to tell me if you would like me to continue doing webinars on the subject matter. It's been a pleasure having you here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you at future webinars and hopefully see you at our upcoming in-person event in Orange County, California. We appreciate your time and thank you so much.